Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
We have. Oh, hold on a second. I've got a delay. There we go. We have Rick and Bill from Texas, who kindly agreed to come on to the show because I had a tweet out there saying, like, hey, I'd love to have a discussion around the famous forward party event last week that everybody was talking about, but not everybody could go to. Did anybody go that wants to talk about what all went down? And there's just generally a high demand from a lot of folks that watch Nerds for Humanity about what's new with the forward party. So very appreciative of Rick and Bill agreeing to come onto the show and spend some time with us. Oh, and actually, we have another person, Holden, who was
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Holden. Hello,
Hey,
nerds.
Holden.
How are you guys doing?
We're good. We're good. We're just talking about you were the third person that agreed to come on because you were at the Texas event last week as well. Why don't we start with some quick introductions, and we'll go Rick, Bill, and then Holden. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with the Ford Party, and then after that we'll get into last week's event.
Yeah, sure. Rick Kennedy, co-chair of the Forward Party of Texas with Bill, and ran for United States Congress as a Democrat in 2018 and 2020 here in Texas in the 17th district. And after the 2020 election, kind of walked away from that whole process, thinking that this system is messed up. I'll never get engaged in this again. Played Minecraft for 3 weeks solid, then went back to my day job, pretty much vowing to never really, other than in capacity as a voter, get back involved in politics again. Fast forward to January of this year, purely out of curiosity, I sat in on the first Texas Forward Party Zoom call, which was about 8 or 10 of us statewide. That was the statewide call in Texas at that point. And at the end of that call, I kind of turned around and looked at my fiance and said, damn it, I've got to get involved. And just got swept into it. And here we are 8 months later.
Love it. So you're a Texas Forward Party OG, as it were.
Yep,
well,
exactly.
Yeah, welcome to the show, Rick. Bill, let's hear about you.
So I'm a Houston native. Grew up just south of here, South Houston a little ways, and University of Houston undergraduate law school. Got out and spent 40 years in business and practicing law. I've always been involved in politics. My undergraduate degree was in political science. I've always had a fascination with it. Been involved in various levels. I was actually the mayor of the small town I grew up in, south of Houston, for a number of years. I moved into Houston proper, and in 2015, I ran for mayor as a independent, which you're not supposed to be able to do. And first got in the race, there were like, I don't know, 8 or 9 candidates, and the first poll came out, and I was in 9th place with 3 or 4% of the vote and a 9% name ID, and ended up getting into the runoff and came within about 0.5% of winning mayor of Houston as an independent. And so I read a long time ago what the founding fathers had to say about political parties, and they were none too complimentary about them. And I thought they were right. And so I've never really been a fan of either political party. I spent a lot of time working in the sort of electoral reform space, Unite America, No Labels, some of those kind of people. Just didn't see anything getting done. And a couple of years ago, I read Lee Drutman's book, Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop, in which he advocated, no, forget about the nonpartisan, independent stuff. What we need is more political parties and better political parties. And I really became convinced that was the case. And so I joined a group called SAM that had started up in New England area a few years ago, and agreed to try to organize Texas for them. It turned out by pure serendipity, Andrew and I had a mutual friend in New York who introduced us. And so we got on a Zoom call, really hit it off. he was coming to Texas the following weekend to go actually to Unite America event. And so we agreed we would meet up there at that event and get better acquainted. We spent most of one afternoon together. And I took him to the airport, dropped him off. And as he was getting out of the car, he said, this was just after he'd started the Forward Party. He said, you think there's any chance we could merge our two parties? And I said, look, I think we need to consolidate this middle part of the spectrum. I think it's crazy for us to be having a bunch of different groups out there trying to do the same thing. And that led into a conversation that about 9 months later resulted in Sam, Ram, and Ford merging. And that's how Rick and I became work spouses. He was chairing the Forward Party, and I was chairing the Sam Party. So we became co-chairs of the new Forward Party.
Wow, that sounds awesome. I would love to have been a fly on the wall in that drive to the airport. It sounds like you guys had a great conversation. Well, thanks, Bill. Holden, I'm guessing you come from a different generation than the three of us old fogies here.
Wait just a minute here.
Okay, what makes you say that?
It's hating my old people all about.
I'll say I don't have quite the same experience.
Tell us about yourself, Holden.
So I'm 21. I'm from Connecticut, and I've only gotten interested in politics the last few years. After the 2016 election, I kind of had this sense bubbling up that things were not going the right way, and something needed to change. It seemed like a very big thing needed to change, and so I was looking around at the candidates in the different parties, and I felt like Andrew Yang was such a breath of fresh air in 2020. Personally, I got engaged with his campaign. I went to Iowa and New Hampshire for that, thinking that we needed to get out of this partisanship, this cycle of doom, that the parties are perpetuating. And Bill, I liked what you were talking about the founding fathers, how they had, they didn't put anything about political parties in the Constitution, but they did have pretty strong feelings about them. Our first few presidents didn't like them, and I think Washington, by remaining independent, had tried to establish this precedent of independence. But I got more and more engaged and thinking of working outside the two-party system. And last year, when the Forward Party was announced, I jumped right on board. I thought, this is the movement I've been waiting for. And, the desire of people to of different groups to merge together and get something really going here, where a bunch of different groups currently are trying to do the same thing, trying to unite that whole movement. It's inspiring. And so I jumped on board with that.
Awesome. So we have Texas, Connecticut, and California represented in this call, and apologize to those of you who are noticing one of my nerdlings who's outside my office practicing piano the moment I decided to go live. And I asked him all morning to practice, and he's like, oh, I'll do it later. And here we are. Maybe this is his way of telling me he doesn't want to practice piano. Well, let's talk about this event. So was this a Forward Party Texas event, or was it a Forward Party national event that took place in Texas? Maybe Rick and Bill, you can share, and then Holden, be cool to get your perspective on how you arrived there too.
And the short answer is yes to all of the above. The kernel of the idea, actually, Bill hatched this way back in February, March, something like that, if not earlier. It was before the merger. It was going to be a joint Forward Party Sam Party event, and there was no national component to it at all. But then things evolved as the merger came to a closure and the two organizations came together. And then National's plans to how to begin to roll out the party on a national level, and the tour that they were going to put in place to do that. Since we had already had significant momentum in planning this event in Houston, National decided that this is a good opportunity to to use this as a launching point for a national tour. So it all kind of merged, and there was lots of back and forth about what the national components were going to be, what the goals of the state party were, and how to mesh those things together. And eventually, on maybe the morning of the event, it all merged together and came together as a final plan, and off we went.
Was that your recollection too, Bill?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. If you're going to be, we are really focused on organizing the infrastructure of a party. I mean, there's some things about the parties that we really don't like and we want to avoid like the plague, but there's some things that they do well, which are fundamental to a political party. And one of those is having a geographic organization in place, because the election laws are organized around that kind of structure. And so I had already been recruiting county chairs and precinct chairs to serve in the SAM party. And so what this was really originally designed to do was to expand that network even more and try to get more people recruited. And so Sam and Rick has made this point, like Sam and Ford had a little bit different, at least in Texas, we had a little bit different approaches. I had been out recruiting mostly people that have been involved in politics for a really long time. And so the SAM group tended to be older, but also a lot more experienced, a lot of former elected officials, people that had worked in campaigns, run campaigns, really knew sort of the ropes around how you get things done in politics. The Forward side were more people like Holden, which were younger people that were coming in, wanting to get involved with a lot of enthusiasm. And Rick was kind of building the Forward Party from the ground up. His was sort of grassroots and ours sort of grass tops. So it was really kind of a perfect merger in a lot of ways, because all of a sudden we had young, enthusiastic people coming in, but we also had some old heads around that had some experience and kind of knew what it took to get it done. So maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I went out and hired a lawyer and said, what exactly do we have to do under the Texas Election Code to get a party organized and be on the ballot? And we've been very methodically working towards that goal. And this was originally designed to further that. But National came along and said, look, you guys have already got a decent crowd. Let's make this a national event. We'll bring it in and, put some pizzazz behind it. And I think it all worked fine. I think that, looking back on it, I think this really hard work of building a party, it certainly takes inspiration, but we probably needed more time to talk about exactly what it means to be a county chair and a precinct chair. And, as the afternoon wore off, some people had to leave to go, the kids' baseball games and those kind of things. So it'll be interesting to see how we do them in the future. But yeah, it was basically an event to kick off, talk about the national merger, talk about sort of the essence of what the Forward Party is going to be. But then also there was this really practical component of building out the infrastructure in Texas.
Holden, what was your perspective? You're out there on the East Coast, you're following the Forward Party, and then how did you hear about this event?
Well, I follow the party pretty closely, and found out that week was the week I had off of work. And so I kind of thought to myself, I have to take this opportunity. I have to go see this event. And it seemed to me like it came together really beautifully. I think there was a good balance between the national and the state, as Rick and Bill were talking about, that there was a whole section of the event dedicated to building out the different counties around Texas, building these local communities for the party that can get stuff done, while also, talking nationally, saying like, this is the ultimate goal of the party, what we're going to kind of ultimately be trying to do. And I think a lot of the people there saw that. And, I met people from all over the country. I think I met fewer people from Texas than, people who traveled from New York, from New Mexico, all over the country. So there was definitely a balance to it. And I think it worked really well. It came together really beautifully.
Love it. I'd love to touch a little bit with Rick and Bill about the party merger that obviously preceded the event. On the one hand, it made a ton of sense in that, there are all these entities that were trying to challenge the kind of duopoly. On the other hand, I imagine there's like this Venn diagram of policy priorities and positions, and I know a lot of folks in the Yang camp notice, oh, basic income isn't a official platform plank at the moment. Could you share a little bit more about the dynamics of that merger, because it wasn't like a perfect one-to-one kind of overlap, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'll take this one. I think this is really an important part of the essence of what the Ford Party is about. And I'm going to use the initial conversation that Andrew and I had when we first met. First of all, we just really liked each other. I mean, they were just I mean, look, Andrew is a very likable person, right? I mean, it's hard to say, this guy's, not fun to be around and he has a good sense of humor and all that. But what I liked about him was he wasn't dogmatic about any of his views, and he wanted to know what I thought about stuff. And I think when you start when we start talking about very specific platforms in a political party, what they basically do is divide us.
Mm.
And that's what the other political parties are focused on. They're focused on a tribal identification. If you don't believe what we believe, then you need to be in another tribe. You need to be in the other tribe, you know. And I'm on a political talk show here in Houston. We did a show this morning, and we were talking about abortion. And the Republican platform is life begins at conception, and so you should never have any abortion, no matter what. The Democratic platform is you ought to have an abortion anytime you want one. But there's only about 10% of the people in the country that believe the Republican view, and only about 15% of the country that believes the Democratic view on that. It's stated in their platforms. There's about 80% of the American people that have a very nuanced view about this. It says, well, early on in the abortion probably ought to be up to the woman, but as you get further along, there ought to be some pretty good reasons to have an abortion. That's where the vast bulk of the country is. And so the reason they have those things in their platform is to drive people away and to solidify their tribe. And the truth of the matter is, and I say this, and I hate to admit this, especially with somebody as young as Holden here, I've been working in political campaigns for 50 years in Texas. People do not vote on issues. As much as we talk about issues and we say they do, all of the research shows people do not vote about issues. And there's a great book, if you want to read up on this, called The Political Brain by Drew Weston. People vote on sort of the emotion of how they feel in the moment and how the party or candidate makes them feel. I can promise you, people who voted for Trump had no idea what his platform was because Donald Trump didn't know what his platform was. Hillary Clinton had a detailed platform. I mean, 6,000 pages of policy statements and all that. People didn't vote for Ronald Reagan because of what they thought his platform was. They voted for him because they were tired of the dour sort of Jimmy Carter days, and they wanted something that was new America, bright, shining hill. They wanted some optimism. They didn't vote for Bill Clinton because of what his policies was. They voted because he said, "I feel your pain. I understand things are tough out there in the economy right now." And so I think at this moment in history, I think why Ford is being so successful is there's this overwhelming feeling that there's dysfunction in government, that we can't get anything done. There's no pragmatic problem solving. Everybody is off in their ideological corners fighting with each other. And the thing that you heard over and over at the convention on Saturday is people were talking about civility. They were talking about pragmatism. Something that was said from the stage a number of times, which really resonated with me, is we need to be the party that leads with grace. And when Andrew and I were coming back from Austin the other night together, we were talking about this. This is really almost as much a spiritual movement as it is a political movement. And make sure you understand what I say when I'm saying spiritual. I'm not saying religious. But the spirit of this country right now is broken. We're yelling at each other over all sides of, really detailed policy positions, and we're missing the bigger picture. That we're all Americans, we're all in this together, and we need to sit down and work things out together. There needs to be that process. And let me use the example of UBI for a second, because I know, Tom, that's an important issue to you and important to a lot of other people. So when you start talking about UBI, there's actually a lot of different ways that could be implemented. I think most conservatives don't realize that it really started with Milton Friedman a long time ago. And originally the Heritage Foundation was before they became against it. I first read about it in the book, The Second Machine Age. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that. It's a great book, talks about the depreciation of the value of labor and how we compensate for that. And that perhaps that's one way we ought to do it. I read about the Swiss experience. So look, I don't know that I've got an exact position on UBI right now. I think it would depend a lot on how it would be implemented. Is it going to replace other policies? And so if we start trying to write a position on every damn issue that's out there right now, all it's going to do is divide us, and we're going to start arguing a bunch of details that don't make any difference until we have political power. And what drives me crazy about the two political parties right now is, to them, compromising is weakness. It's giving up. It's giving in to the other side. Please tell me any relationship in your life that you don't compromise on things about. Now, the only one I know is my wife, because whatever she says, I say, yes, ma'am, whatever you want to do. All my other relationships in my life involve some level of compromise. And so I think the essence of the Forward Party is bringing back the spirit of compromise, of pragmatic problem solving, of controlling and valuing the way we talk to each other and the way we talk about each other. Recognizing that just because I don't agree with you about something, I don't have to hate you. You know, you're not stupid just because you've come to a different conclusion than I've come to. That's what I think this party is really all about.
Holden, I'm curious to get your take, because you came from the Yang kind of presidential movement where UBI was definitely, there was this notion of a mindset of abundance and being more civil. I think that's always been Andrew's approach. But, basic income was a big rallying cry for a lot of folks. I'm curious, how did you take this, and what's your response to kind of Bill's perspective, which is, we don't need to have a 100-page detail on every policy position because it'll just divide us. We can kind of look more meta across multiple issues.
I'm kind of on the same page as that in that line of thinking. I think UBI implementing that would depend, as Bill said, on a lot of different things. What kind of program are you proposing? Is it like a Milton Friedman style UBI, or is it something more closer to what Andrew Yang proposed in 2020? But the core of the issue, in my view, that Forward Party is getting right is that we have an issue of representation in America. We have an issue of representation and choice. And so we can propose, the best ideas possible, the best ideas out there. But if we don't have the ability to get political power and get people into government who are going to argue in good faith over those policies, then, we're starting from square one every time. So I think Forward Party gets right that this is kind of a several step process that we need. If there's something like close to half of the American people are independent from Gallup polling, that means about half of us don't have representation. And so Washington is operating based on the interests of maybe half the country. And, for a lot of the people within those parties, they also think their parties are too extreme. So you have a situation where it's probably a minority of Americans are getting representation. And if you expand that, then you're going to start having better results, because you're going to have people who want to get things done, people who want to improve their country rather than just serving their party, which is, our whole electoral incentives are just designed to benefit the parties right now. And so that needs to be, reworked before these ideas like UBI can really be talked about, I think.
Rick, how did you take the merger? Was that a no-brainer from your perspective?
Oh, sure. Yeah, especially here especially here, as Bill said, in the state of Texas, where the Sam Party was building from the top down and the Forward Party was building from the bottom up. The synergy there was obvious, and you need both to be an effective political party. And in literally at the stroke of a pen in a single day, that merger accomplished something here in Texas that the two organizations independently would have taken another year or two, perhaps, if not longer, to actually get done otherwise. So extremely important and extremely synergistic and beneficial for the party here in Texas. And it really leapfrogged. It really catapulted us ahead as far as organization goes. I just want to I want to layer on a little bit to what both Bill and Holden said, especially about the fact that roughly half this country does not identify strongly with either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And I just like to point out, I like to make this point. What that means is the Republican Party and the Democratic parties are both minority parties, right? Neither of them represents a majority of the people. And there's this large swath, depending on what survey you want to look at, 40%, 50%, 60% in the middle, that we look at as the exhausted majority, right? These are the folks who are absolutely exhausted by the rhetoric, the divisiveness, the hateful rhetoric that's coming out of both parties, and just wants government to actually work for the people and get something done. And that's why we're gaining traction here, because we're not appealing to that demographic with, again, a bunch of detailed policy statements. We're appealing to that demographic, and as Bill said, Bill uses the word spiritual all the time, almost from a gut instinct standpoint, where this exhausted majority in the middle is looking for something different, and the Forward Party is different by design.
Let's talk a little bit about this spiritual theme, grace. I love it. I love data and being objective and pragmatic and dispassionate and just solving problems. I also know that when I observe what animates many voters in America is not grace, but grievance and anger and, some demonization of the other tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, it feels like the Forward Party is going to be trying to be acting with grace and pragmatism and speaking for the majority of folks, and they're going to get drowned out by the screaming about, they're coming after your pronouns, or they want to put all the migrants in cages, whatever side you want to talk about, and nothing gets done, and the candidates get rewarded in elections for animating people.
So, yeah, I'll tell you, I respectfully disagree with you. That's what animates most voters. I think right now that's what animates maybe 15, 20% on each side. And those of us stuck in the middle go to the polls and decide to vote for the lesser of two evils. We're not animated by it, we're turned off by it, but we have no choice in this rigged two-party system that we live in. I don't know if y'all are familiar with, there's an author named Jonathan Haidt who wrote a book called Moral Tribes here a few years ago, talking about some of these very issues. And I saw him at a dinner not too long ago in New York, and he was talking about social media and how social media is so awful, and Facebook is so terrible, and these are things that are dividing us, and they make people hate, and people say all these terrible things on Facebook and social media all the time. And I said, John, I'm not sure I agree with you, because my wife is on Facebook all the time. She never posts anything political. They're putting up pictures of grandchildren. They're wishing their girlfriends wishing you a happy birthday. Her Bible study class is exchanging Bible verses, pictures of sunrises. Those of us that are, really submerged in this political world don't realize the vast majority of Americans are not. The vast majority of Americans are decent people out there working every day. They're not fighting with their neighbors over politics. We've got two political parties and media surrogates that make money and control political power by convincing us that's the view of America, but it's not. I went to my grandson's robotic tournament the other day, walked in, and I was just for me coming out of, my generation, you walk in a robotic tournament, it's in a gymnasium. There's cheerleaders, there's huge people, huge crowds of people. I'm like, wow, this is like when I used to play basketball in high school, And I look across the crowd now, and it is the most diverse crowd you can possibly. I mean, it looked like the United Nations had come to this Houston suburb. I mean, every potential color, flavor of human being you can imagine was in that room, and the teams had different, components on it, and they were working together, and they were cheering each other on, and people were, patting the kids on the back, and there were white dads patting black kids, and there were black kids, black parents out there showing their Asian how to this. But I mean, you would have no idea that we're supposedly this big divided country. That is the real America. And let me ask you this question. What percentage of the American people do you think watches CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News combined in the evening? When the real nuts run,
A
Hannity
third?
and all these people.
40%?
What percentage of the American people do you think watches all that crap?
I would put it at 1%.
1%. About 1.3%.
Really?
Nightly news. I'm just telling you, for those of us that are in this political space, we have a skewed view of how the rest of the country is. And I think we saw it at this convention. I'm telling you, when people stood up and said things like, we are to lead with grace, people were cheering. I thought people were going to start crying. I mean, the people in the exhausted majority, the exhausted middle, which I love the phrase Rick used earlier, are just so sick of the acrimony. The only other time we've had a successful third party in the United States was when the Republican Party supplanted the Whig Party in the 1850s. And they came forward on a moral issue, which was slavery, abolishing slavery. I'm convinced this is the same kind of moment in the moral history of the country, that this country is tired of what we're seeing in these two political parties.
I totally agree with you. If you look at your local community, and as a fellow robotics family, I've seen those I've seen those gyms as well. Side note, at our local high school, you could pretty much walk onto the football team, but there's a 3-week tryout process for the robotics team.
Nice.
So it's amazing how things have changed. A question for you though, when I look at the Congress, and I look at, say, AOC and her squad, or Lauren Boebert and her squad, there's a lot of people in Congress who definitely have played that grievance game, and they got rewarded for it.
It's because, and this is really important to understand, it's because of the structure. Exactly. We have a structure that incentivizes people to act like that, because what we've allowed to happen in this country is for political primaries to control who the rest of us are going to vote for in November. In the 2020 election, in the primaries, the turnout for both sides combined was about 25%. So 25% of the country decided who the other 75% are going to vote for in November. And so, look, I know a lot of decent, fine people that voted for Donald Trump. The only reason they did was because they thought that, the alternative was going to be worse for them and their family and their businesses. They didn't like Trump. They didn't vote for Trump. They voted against the other side. And that's increasingly what happens. If we're going to continue to allow the ideological extremes of this country to control who the rest of us have to vote for in November, you're going to end up with a Congress that looks nothing like the country looks. And by the way, that doesn't even begin to represent what the American people want. I mean, the American people want an abortion law that says early on, it's up to the woman. After that, you need to have a pretty good reason. We need to work out those details. But that's what the majority of the country wants right now. You don't get that out of either one of these political parties. You're not getting it in Congress. You're not getting it out of the Texas legislature, because the political parties do not represent the heart and soul of this country.
And on top of that, not just the primaries and the fact that a very small minority of people vote in the primaries, state legislatures are gerrymandering districts to the point where the general election doesn't even matter. right? It's the primary, even though you'll have a general election where you're going to present the general electorate with, as Bill says, a choice of lesser of two evils. The outcome of that general election has already been predetermined by the state legislature who drew the district boundaries in the first place. So that dynamic just forces people like Lauren Boebert, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, to go even further to the right to defend their position with their base, so that they make sure they get through the primary, because they know for all intents and purposes that is the general election for them, and for like 90+% of all congressional seats in this country. So, the fact is, Congress does not represent the people. The House of Representatives, that's supposed to be the people's house, does not represent the people of the United States. It represents the 50 various state legislatures that put them that drew the districts to put them there.
So, at the risk of using a trigger word, in some ways, I do agree that this system is kind of rigged for these two existing parties, and I'm wondering, should that be, or will that be kind of the focus, so like the voting mechanics, the open primaries, the ranked choice for the top 5? Is that something we can all agree on, or how do you think about kind of the voting reform?
Those are core principles for the Forward Party. We've all agreed on those. They're on our. If you're on our website, you will see all of those supported. I think we're talking internally about adding to that list. One thing I'm advocating is a constitutional amendment that would overturn Citizens United, because I think the money is another part of this. And I think, for those, look, I appreciate that a lot of people that are listening to this are probably really data oriented, and I am completely that way. And if you go look on my blog, you'll find out I've done detailed research on hundreds of different topics. I used to write a column for the Eastern Chronicle on that. And so as we go along, we're going to be building out more and more specific issues on things. But we think it's really important for us to not dictate down to members or prospective members what those positions ought to be. We ought to build those from the ground up. Now, there's some core principles that we've talked about here, but other things like exactly what our position is going to be on abortion, exactly what our position is going to be on UBI, exactly what our position is going to be on guns. All of those we think need to come up from the bottom. And by the way, they won't be the same in all the states. One of our, and hold on, I don't know if you know this or not, but the mayor of Newtown is a Forward Party member. Oh. And of course, many of you will remember that's where the terrible shooting incident took place. And so, he has a particular view on gun control that's not going to work in Texas, and that's okay. It's okay that we don't come out with exactly the same place everywhere, or that even the four of us on this call don't exactly agree with everything, I mean, who in your life do you agree with about everything? I mean, again, I agree with my wife always. Yes,
I wasn't going to say it, but yeah.
I'm compelled to agree with my wife. I love the spirit of this conversation. People in the chat are really enjoying it. So thanks for being here. I'd like to talk a little bit about how this gets applied in terms of local elections versus, state or federal. Maybe we'll start with you, Holden. What was your read in terms of the last week's conversation, and where would you like to see the Forward Party kind of spend most of its energy?
Well, I think they're right to go after local elections as the kind of primary focus, and that building up this base from the bottom is what's going to work long term. If you look at the history of third parties, Bill mentioned that the Republican Party was the only successful party to come up outside of the major two parties of the system and replace one. And every other attempt that's been made was, pretty much the same story, where they went, one person ran a presidential campaign. They didn't want to run with the two parties, and so they ran their own campaign, and they ran that campaign at the expense of building a viable long-term party. And so I think focusing locally and on these issues like voting reform, I think that's a unique approach throughout history, and that is something that I think has a really strong chance to change the direction of the country. I think, we're talking about gerrymandering in some of these districts, and how a lot of these districts, the politicians choose their voters rather than the voters choosing their politicians. And if you change that dynamic with ranked choice voting and allow third parties to compete, that pushes back on gerrymandering pretty quickly, because instead of one party controlling the district, you now have 3 or 4 parties competing. And, that totally changes the dynamic. It's not just Democrat or Republican. You now have a system of choice, and people vote for who they want to, rather than, the lesser of two evils. So I was very heartened by what the Forward Party said in Houston. I think they're taking the right approach on that level. Because like we were saying, this is an issue of representation, where we've gotten to the point where almost half the country does not feel represented in Congress, and they're right to feel that way. And so what we're dealing with today is not just an issue of, this president was bad and we need to replace that, or this one party is bad and we need to replace them. The whole system of representation is not working as it's supposed to, and that's the issue.
Rick, I'd love to get your thoughts on, this principle that Bill and Holden are talking about, improving the election mechanics and ensuring more competition. I might have one of the members of my family that's in that 1%, Bill. She's a big, my mom's a big Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity watcher. And I tried to discuss politics with her. I always make this mistake at a dinner. And I was like, hey, look, maybe the one thing we can all agree on is why open primaries and ranked choice voting would be good for everybody. And, it just is not something that rolls off the tongue. And, she kind of was suspicious, like, what kind of like scam is this kind of thing? And I'm wondering, like, Rick, how do you, and we can hear from the others as well, but like, how do we make this more accessible? Because it's hard to put it on a bumper sticker. It's not like, build that wall, right?
Right. I mean, there isn't a forward catchphrase, right? That accurately kind of encapsulates what all this systemic reform is about, and it's hard to explain. I try to not even use the word gerrymandering, right? Because it's kind of a weird word, right? Where'd that thing come from? What is that? It's an arcane word. I much more prefer calling it rigging elections, which is exactly what it is, right? Just get straight to the point here. State legislatures are rigging elections. So this is not going to be a one-shot overnight process. It's going to be a state by state. It could even be a county by county approach that is going to slowly roll across the country. And one of the great things about having sovereign states is that they serve as laboratories for experimentation. And we see Alaska has just implemented open primaries and ranked choice voting. Maine has done it. There's a referendum question on the ballot in Nevada to do so also this coming November. And what you'll see is a jurisdiction by jurisdiction rollout rather than a federal top-down rollout of not only actually implementation, but growing awareness and education on the whole process.
Yeah, well, I hope to see that, and certainly even California, we have open top 2, but we don't do ranked choice, and it's just the top 2. But it works pretty well in that at least you get a little bit more competition. Bill, I'm curious about your thoughts around was it discussed as to whether the Forward Party would officially not go after federal seats or right away? Because, you got Yang in the mix, and there's a lot of diehard Yang supporters that would like to see him back in there. And, I grew up in New Jersey, and I remember Whitman well. So curious what your thoughts are.
There's one thing the two parties agree on. They don't want any more competition. And so they make it as hard as they can possibly make it for you to get on the ballot. So you can have a political party all day long, but if you're not on the ballot, it really doesn't matter. And so, and this is part of the, again, taking a sort of pragmatic approach is we've got to get on the ballot. And realistically, the earliest that we can do this is going to be 2024. And so we're beginning to build out all that infrastructure that's necessary. I mean, in Texas, we got to collect 90,000 signatures in a very specific 75-day window in the spring of 2024. And so, it's we've already begun planning that petition gathering drive. We've got litigation going on about the rules around that and everything. This is real nuts and bolts stuff that you've got to do if you're going to build a political party. And so 24 is the earliest that we can possibly go. Now in 24, we're hoping to be on the ballot in all 50 states. And I think we're going to, I think you'll see some federal candidates. I think most of the people in the forward leadership right now think that 24 is not the time to have a presidential candidate out there. That's not a universal view. And ultimately it'll be decided, what we decide to do will be decided by 50 state conventions in 24. But most of the leadership right now thinks that should not be our focus in 24. That what we should be focused on are local races. And in Texas, we have a lot of local races in 23 we're going to be focusing on. And then on the down ballot races in 24, Congress, state houses. Here in Texas, we've got 150 members of the lower house, the House of Representatives. And, we think that if we could elect 10 or 20 members to that body in 24, we could have a huge impact on the way state government runs in Texas, because we'd basically be able to keep either side from doing anything if we didn't think it was reasonable. And so we're kind of strategically focused on that. When they start talking about third party, they immediately start focusing on the presidential election. And it's natural, and I'm not criticizing them for doing that. But the truth of the matter is, you will never build a third party based on a presidential candidate. We've seen that fail over and over and over in the United States, because once that election's over, there's nothing there to sustain the party, because the personality that drove it is not there. Perot, Teddy Roosevelt, you go on down the line. What made the Republican Party sustainable over time was they were committed to this particular moral issue, which is ending slavery. And that was something that carried the party forward. By the way, that party got started around that issue, and then they decided on Abraham Lincoln as their candidate. It wasn't Abraham Lincoln going out and starting a political party. I want to go start an. Matter of fact, if you've read the book Team of Rivals, in the first round of polling at the Republican National Convention, he was 5th out of 5 candidates. And through just an incredible series of events, he ultimately, people started dropping out and supporting him. He became the consensus candidate and became president of the United States in that way. So I think it's very important that, number one, we stay focused on, what is it that's really the driving moral question of our time politically right now. And I think it's the dysfunction of this government, the fact that we have a government that's not democratic because it doesn't represent the will of the American people, and it doesn't represent the fundamental spirit and goodness of the American people. But you've got to combine that with the nuts and bolts, the pragmatic, getting in there and the plumbing of elections and making sure you can get on the ballot and get people elected.
Let's I know we're running short on time. I do want to maybe wrap with what's next. I heard there's going to be a convention, and the political junkie in me is like, oh, I wonder if this will be like a real convention where there's like disagreement and debate, or is it going to be more of a kind of a theatrical kind of production, which has its place as well. Curious, like what when you guys ended the Texas event and talked about next steps, and maybe we'll start with you, Holden. Like, what did you hear? And then we'll talk to Rick about what they were hoping you heard.
Well, I can't speak directly to what the party's planning in terms of the convention. I'll let Rick and Bill talk about that. But the sense that I got was, as you guys have been talking about, that there's a very strategic focus, that this is, we're not just building a party to build a party. We're building a party that's going to have impact in depolarizing state legislatures in the next several years. And so I think I think a national convention, there's definitely a place for that. I think that you want to have this national organization that kind of is stemming from local bases. So local bases will be getting things done, and then you have this national approach that's saying, this is going to be a national party, but this is how we do it, and this is the steps necessary. But in terms of next steps for the party, I'll let Bill and Rick handle that.
All right, Rick, let's go to you, and then we'll go to Bill.
Yeah, just for the short term coming out of the convention, we did achieve one of our primary organizing goals, which was recruit a lot of potential county chairs, a lot of potential precinct chairs, and candidates as well. I don't think we've thrown that onto the mix, but we were looking for folks who might want to run in these nonpartisan municipal elections in 23, as well as forward party candidates in 24. So we've got a lot of loose ends, so to speak, to tie up after the convention. And we've got to get back to just nuts and bolts party building here in the state of Texas. The last 4 to 5 weeks rolling into the convention, everything became about the convention. And now after the convention, we've got to get back to the real grunt work that we were starting to do before the convention, which is, again, get those county chairs on board, get those precinct chairs on board, get various committees that we've got gearing up, get them staffed and rolling, and get the business of building a party in Texas back on track and back to work. And I'll let Bill talk to the longer term goals of 24 conventions and national conventions.
Yeah, so what we did in Texas was not truly a political convention in the traditional sense. It was really more of a rally and organizing event. And my understanding is right now the national leadership is talking about doing a number of these around the country, and probably one next year sometime, maybe in the fall, that would bring everybody together nationally. There will have to be a national, assuming that we get on the ballot like we're planning to, there will have to be a national convention that'll be sometime in the summer of 24. That will be the only real purpose of a national convention is to adopt a national platform and to select presidential candidates, because all the other candidates are selected at the state level at state conventions. So I believe we will have a national convention in 24. That will be the convention that decides whether or not we have a presidential candidate nominated or not. So that would be where that decision ultimately resides, is in the plenary power of that national convention. But one of the reasons for getting together, and this has been really important to me personally, is if you sit in your house and you don't get out and all you do is turn on the cable news, you believe that this country we're on the brink of civil war. I mean, you believe that everybody has got on a red jersey or a blue jersey, and they hate each other. And I think one of the just so refreshing things to me, it's almost like going to therapy. I mean, I go to these meetings and I meet a bunch of nice people, who might not agree with me about everything, but they don't hate me because they don't agree with me on a particular issue. And they're like wanting to talk about stuff and have these constructive conversations. And it's just refreshing and wonderful to have those kinds of political and civic conversations, as opposed to the crap we see on cable news network every night. And so I think a lot of the purpose of these meetings is to bring people together, to show them that the world's really not like what you see on TV, And so I think that's going to be what the principal focus of the big national convention last year will be, to demonstrate to ourselves and to the rest of the country that, hey, there's a whole lot of normal people here, the exhaustive majority, that are ready to have a voice in what goes on in this country.
If I could just jump in there, I really liked what you said about how these experiences are almost like therapy. I definitely had that experience. I, came out of the Houston event feeling really inspired, really heartened to meet all these people from all these different backgrounds. There was someone who said they couldn't feel like they identified with the party since the 80s. There's someone who just within the last few months abandoned their party. There's a lot more people out there the majority of people are like that. It's not, that's why our government is not representing the people, because the majority of people are common sense. They don't care what team you're on. They just, want to leave a good country for their kids.
It was interesting, Tom. In this convention, one of the moderators asked people to raise their hand based on whether they were Republican, Independent, Democrat, or other party. About, I think, a little more than a third were Independent, a little less than a third were Republican, a little less than a third were Democrat, and then there were a few Libertarians and Greens there. And I just thought that was quite fascinating. That they're not all coming from one segment. It's people coming from across the ideological partisan spectrum that are just exhausted, because the polling shows over and over and over that the positions these parties take don't represent the view of the majority of Americans on any topic.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Maybe one other thing I was curious to hear about is candidate quality and candidate recruitment. I was actually talking to someone a couple weeks ago who's running for a local office, and she was saying like, well, it costs a lot to run for office, and it takes a lot of time, and she's a really capable, thoughtful person. And she was like, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, I don't, and what, maybe I won't be able to get anything done. And I got to run against this incumbent that's been there forever. And I'm just a, everyday hardworking, manager in a company. And I go to PTA meetings and soccer games, but I'm not out there all the time with the name recognition that these other folks have. Curious how you all think about finding candidates that can win and giving them the help they need to actually kind of, go against the current a little bit.
As a guy who ran as a Democrat in a R+15 district with no political background whatsoever before I decided to run for United States Congress, go big or go home, right? I can understand where your acquaintance is coming from as far as it's a daunting task. It's just yet another reason to build this effort from the ground up, right? Rather than trying to mount a presidential campaign, let's find folks who are capable and willing and good candidates, as you say, to mount a campaign for justice of the peace, for county commissioner, for city council, for mayor, right? And take on tasks that are, of course, still time consuming and still all consuming when you get right down to it, but at the same time manageable and doable. And you got to match candidates with what their skill set is, what their background is, what their aspirations are, with what is capable, what is possible. We have to be operating in the realm of possibility, not in the realm of dreamland. Not moonshots for the White House, but or electing folks for your local justice of the peace.
Yeah, if I could piggyback off that, I think it's critical that you look at, you understand the way the system works if you want to be able to reform it. And so American politics is very decentralized. It's, decentralized throughout these states. At the federal level, you don't have one president with all this power. And so if you were taking the approach of saying, let's just run a presidential candidate, that wouldn't solve your problems. If you won the presidential race and then say that you have a president in office, but then no local or state, elected officials, you're not going to be able to solve the problems because people aren't going to work with you, and that you don't have the power to change these things. Where the power rests to change these things is local, state legislatures. You have to kind of take this approach of, well, it's decentralized throughout the country, power is. And so if we want to change things, we have to have a decentralized approach. We have to look, see things for how they stand currently.
We have some questions in the chat room that if we have a few more minutes, I'd love to kind of hit them real quick, if that's okay with the guests. And if you guys have to run, I understand as well. Just feel free to drop off and we'll try and hit them real quick though. So Trumper for Yang says, can you explain the mechanics or motivation behind seeking ballot access in all 50 if Ford is not focused on running a POTUS candidate and only a few national candidates? Why not just pick off a few states and, kind of focus on those?
Well, I think, a good question. the reason is that if we're going to build, this is not about. I mean, if you look at what happened with Pro and the Reform Party, you look at what happened with Teddy Roosevelt and the Bull Moose Party. There was nothing. There was no there after that presidential campaign was over. And so what we're trying to do is build a sustainable political party for the next 10, 20, 100 years in America. Okay. And to do that, we've got to be a 50-state party. Now, will we be successful in getting on the ballot in all 50 states? I don't know. It's really tough to get on the ballot in a few of these states. I think there's going to be some litigation over a lot of that. There's currently a lawsuit pending in Texas on that, and we got a little bit of a minor victory on that the other day. So it's going to take a while. But, we want to affect policy at the local, state, and national level. And look, I've been involved mostly in local government all my life, being a mayor and running for mayor of Houston. I can tell you that the mayor of Houston has a whole lot more impact on my daily life than the president of the United States does. Mm-hmm. Because that's who decides how much my garbage bill is going to be, my property taxes, whether the police are going to show up, whether the ambulance is going to show up. And so those races are really important to people. And it's really important to policy outcomes as well. So we want to focus up and down the ballot on those things. And I think it's important that if we've got supporters in every state, and we do, by the way, then we need to enable them, empower them to try to affect the politics in their state. So that's the idea behind that. And look, I don't, again, the 24 Ford Convention, wherever it's held, will ultimately be the body that decides whether we're going to nominate anybody for president or not. And so I don't want to give the impression that a bunch of old gray hairs like me are sitting around deciding this is what we're going to do and not do. Ultimately, that will be decided by Ford Party members. But the leadership right now thinks that's not the best focus for us.
Yeah, I totally get the idea of building something, to last and be intergenerational, and you got to be in all 50 to do that. I guess there would be a trade-off, I would imagine, in terms of resources that, maybe by spreading volunteers and finite kind of funding across all 50 efforts, you might have been able to get some big wins that you might come short on. Is that a discussion topic? Or
Well, certainly from a tactical level, you've got to decide where you're going to deploy your resources. And frankly, we're doing that even in this cycle. One of the races that we are involved in is the Utah Senate race. I don't know if any of y'all are following that race out there at all, but in that race, Mike Lee is the incumbent senator, sort of pro-Trump, election denier kind of guy. And Evan McMullin, who was a former Republican, Romney acolyte, who served in the CIA during all the terrorist events and everything. He ran for president in the Republican Party. He started out in the Republican Party, then he left over Trump, and he ended up running as an independent in Utah. And I think got 23% of the vote or something like that in Utah as an independent. And so he decided to run against Mike Lee for the Senate in this cycle in 22. Mm-hmm. The Democratic Party in Utah decided not to nominate a candidate. So it's just the two of them in the race. And so, and by the way, the polling right now is, basically, I think a couple of the polls have Mike Lee up by 1, and no one has Evan up by 2 or something like that. Yep. And so it's a very, very tight race. And so a lot of us are donating money and going out to volunteer to help Evan out there in that race. And we'll be doing those kind of strategic things in 24 as well. There's a lot of places to serve, a lot of places to be important. And, I was thinking about, I think there's a U.S. Senate seat up in New York in 24. Maybe Senator Yang would be a good idea. I think there's a lot of places for people to figure out where they want to be to affect all of this, But, it looks like right now it's going to be Biden and Trump again, and that's not a choice anybody wants to have. And if you get in there as a third party, whoever wins, you're going to be blamed for, causing the other one to win. We're probably not ready to win a presidential election in 24. So there's a lot of us that think it's probably best just to stay out of it in 24 and wait until 28.
Well, if you ever talk to Evan and he wants to come on a nerdy podcast, I would love to interview him.
He's a nerd for sure.
Well, let's get him. Let's get him in the nerd zone. Another question in the chat room from RJ. What's the news on funding? A lot of people I talk to are concerned that Ford is taking or will take money from PACs that will put them on one side or the other. And I'll add on to that. I'm kind of on the other side of the coin, which is like, I hope these guys have enough money to do this stuff, because it's not, it takes resources. Anything that you can share about how the Ford party,
We're
will
raising
have.
a fair amount of money right now with small contributions. We also have some very large donors. There's some billionaires that are really distraught about what is going on in this country and fall in that exhausted majority group. And so the funding's held up pretty good so far. And I think that as the movement grows, the funding will grow. I will say that my experience, and again, in working in a lot of campaigns over the years, is that money is there. Most people have an exaggerated view of the importance of money in elections. You've got to have a certain amount of money to participate in the election, but it does not predict how the outcome of the election is going to be. If it did, you would be talking about President Hillary Clinton right now. She outraised Trump by 6-1 or something like that in that first race. Here in my race locally, we raised, I think we were outraised 2 or 3-1 and still came within 0.5% of winning that election for the mayor's race. A lot of it's about the message. A lot of it's about the earned media you get. And right now, the amount of earned media Ford is getting is incredible. I mean, just all, Andrew's, that's one of his real strengths, is getting on and being able to talk about this without us having to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
David Jolly, who was our former executive chairman at SAM, is on NBC, NCN. He gets a chance to talk about it a lot for nothing. Miles Taylor is another one. So we're getting a lot of coverage right now that we don't have to pay for, which is great. But you would be surprised how much small things move election. For example, when I ran for mayor, what got us really kicked off is we ran this a very aggressive bumper sticker campaign. And we had 20,000 bumper stickers in the city of Houston pretty early on in the campaign. Every place you drove around Houston, you saw Bill King for mayor bumper sticker with somebody. People had no idea who I was. Wow, I've seen that guy's sticker 2 or 3 times. Who is he?
And bumper stickers are cheap. They're
nothing to do. If you want to really help this party, go online right now, order a Ford bumper sticker and have them send it to you and put it on your car and start driving around. I pulled up into a valet line the other day, and this is I've still got a Sam bumper sticker on my car because I hadn't got my new one in yet. But I pulled into a valet line. The valet guy walks around. He goes, "Hey, tell me about that bumper sticker you got." And I said, "Well, we're trying to start a new party." Well, tell me. I said, "Well, we're just kind of sick of these extremes, and we would like some common sense." He goes, "Can you send me some information about that? Here's my telephone number." This is the guy in the valet line, And so there's a lot of things you can do on a very grassroots level that are very effective. Interesting book. I'll give y'all 2 books I want to recommend to you. I'm in my blog, I recommend books all the time. So one is Cascades, which is a book that talks about social movements in the last couple of decades and how they take off organically and happen almost overnight. And it starts talking about the color revolutions in Eastern Europe when the Soviet Union was really was thrown out. And the other book is called The White Working Class. And I really recommend it to this audience because I find when I'm talking to people that come from the more progressive side of the spectrum, that they have a very skewed view of the white working class and why they voted for Donald Trump. And I think that a lot of people on the progressive side, are prone to say they're not well educated, they're racist, they're a bunch of different things. Almost none of that stuff is true. And this book called The White Working Class was written by a progressive Democrat, law school professor, and she did a great job of describing in there what is really going on in the white working class in America and why they're behaving like they are. And I would really highly recommend it to everybody because it gets back again to the thing that the truth of the matter is there's not nearly as much difference in how we feel about this country, what we want for future generations, and we have a big agreement on what the goal is. The disagreement is how we get there, and we're letting how we get there make us lose sight of the fact that we're really quite united in what we want America to look like in the future.
Tom, I've got a,
Yeah, go
this is
ahead.
a data and statistic friendly audience, right? So
You
I've
bet-
got
you bet it is.
a data point to back up Bill's point on white working class. In the year 2000, in the 2000 election, the counties that voted for George Bush accounted for 46% of GDP. In 2020, just 20 years later, the counties that voted for Donald Trump accounted for only 29% of GDP. It's almost the same number of counties, about 2,500 counties, probably many of the same counties themselves. And that goes all the way back to Bill Clinton. It's the economy, stupid, right?
Mhm.
So when you look at those counties lost a third of their share, so to speak, of GDP, then you can start to begin to understand that there are some legitimate economic grievances and concerns that are coming out of that white working class. And so
you wonder, why are they pissed off?
right, why are they ticked off? And believe me, I mean, I ran a congressional campaign throughout Central Texas, and there are some once thriving downtowns in Central Texas that are now nothing but boarded up storefronts, decaying, falling over, because the economy, the local economies are absolutely shot. So yeah, there's no, Donald Trump leveraged that anger, those grievances. He didn't create it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Let me tell you a quick story that I think you might enjoy if I've got some time here.
Yeah, go for it.
So there's a little town, about 10,000 people, LaGrange, Texas, which is about halfway between Houston and Austin. And that county voted for Donald Trump 70+%. They had a mayor's race here the other day, and the people in the mayor's race, there was a white woman that had been mayor for a long time, and she was stepping down. There was a white guy that was kind of a Trump kind of guy. There was a white lady that was a more like sort of typical Chamber of Commerce Republican type person, and then there was a black lady that had been the school secretary for a long time. In this town that voted 70% plus for Trump, the black lady was elected without a runoff in that election. And I called up and I talked to a friend of mine up there. And I said, I was really curious about y'all's election and this lady getting elected. You know, why? What? Oh, Bill, she's worked as the school secretary at the elementary school for 30 years. Everybody knew who she was. She's a wonderful person. You know, all of us went through that school, and she was the school secretary, and she would, always take care of us and everything. And she said, she also checks out groceries at the local grocery store. So everybody goes through there and they talk to her and all that. I said, well, that's just incredible. I said, I'd like to talk to her sometime. And she goes, well, I'll tell you what, I just saw her checking out groceries the other day. I'll be sure when I go back through it. I said, she's the mayor of town and she's still checking groceries. yeah, she's still, because she likes to have the contact. Here was this group that, if the people in MSNBC had looked at that town and looked at that election, they said, she'll come in last place with no votes, and she wins the election without a runoff. The American people are more complicated. They're more nuanced. And they're a lot better than we give them credit for being.
I'd love to wrap up with some closing thoughts from each guest. Really, really thought-provoking conversation. And I hope everybody who's watching this live or on replay takes the time to like and share it out with other people so that folks can benefit from all the wisdom and perspective and opinions and discussion here. And I'm glad it was conducted in a very calm and thoughtful way. So Holden, why don't we start with you and then we'll go to Rick and Bill. Any closing thoughts? Also, if any of you have any shout outs for how people can learn more about, your blog or your follow you on social or anything like that, now's a great time to do that too. So Holden, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so you could find me on Twitter, or my Substack is Union Forward, which is focused on the Forward Party. My closing thoughts would be, telling people that you have the power to change. Each of us has the power to change something. Government is a collection of people. It's determined by the people who get engaged and say, I'm committed to making something change here. So we all have it within our power. You can run for local office. You can, do whatever is within your capacity. If enough people do it, then that's the way the country's going to go, because it's just run by people. And so I think this party has a really long, interesting future ahead of it, and I'm excited.
Thanks, Holden. Rick?
Yeah, as I said in my opening, after the 2020 election, I checked out of politics, thinking that the system was just beyond repair. And then 8 months ago, I got back in because I found the message and the mission of the Forward Party to be extremely important, and also viable and credible. And this is the right moment in history. And as Holden said, this is people on the ground that are gonna get this done. So not only keep an eye on us, but wherever you are, come on out and join us, right? If you share the mission, if you share the goal, step up in any capacity, whatever that capacity may be. Maybe your capacity is running running for office. Maybe all you can do is maybe write a few postcards for a candidate someday. Either way, you can have impact, and you can move this movement forward.
Thanks, Rick. Bill?
Here a few years ago, we had this terrible flood in Houston, Harvey. Flooded about 20% of the whole city, and there were rescues all over town, and there were food kitchens set up for people that didn't have food and everything. And most people know about Houston, but Houston is the most diverse city in the United States. We have more ethnic groups here. We have no majority in Houston. You name any nationality, faith group, ethnic group, we've got 10,000 of them someplace in Houston. Houston came together to support each other in that, rescuing people out of stranded houses. Nobody asked, who was a Republican or a Democrat. Nobody cared if they were rescuing a black family or a white family or an Asian family or whatever it was. The whole town came together and did that. And we're seeing that now in Florida with this event. That is what the real America is. The American people are fundamentally a good, fair people. And the problem is we don't have political parties that represent the fundamental decency of the American people, and we need to build one. Come help us do it.
I love it. I really hope this party makes some history, and I'll be engaging more with the California Forward Party to find out how I can help as well. Thank you so much to all of you for spending over an hour on your Sunday talking about parties and policy. You really, kind of are walking the walk. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
All right. See you guys later. Bye.
Thank you, Tom.
See ya. All right. What a great panel. You gotta love that. That Bill character. I could see him being a very important spokesperson for the Forward Party. Obviously, it was a great conversation with everybody. And I think I'd love to have all of them back on the show. And it was cool having a cross section with Rick having run for office and running for Congress, and Holden from Connecticut, representing the younger generation. Let me know in the comments what you thought. Were you persuaded? I kind of feel like I'm more bullish on the Forward Party now. And maybe if we had more time, we could talk about the Forward Party's communication strategy. Do they feel like the word is getting out, and are people hearing it? I would imagine they would say, hey, it's early, we're just getting started, we got a lot of local stuff going on. But it was super cool. I also liked how at least, Bill's assessment is that the consensus is not to go for a presidential candidate in 24. I personally find that to be a more realistic approach as well. And I would love to see the Ford Party get some wins locally. Get some points on the board. Move those chains, as it were, right? Given that it's Sunday and everybody's probably going to be watching football soon. Let me thank the people who make this channel possible. By the way, if you got this far into the live stream and you're still here, can you do me a solid and like and share? Because I think Bill and Rick and Holden, like, people need to hear their perspective. And there's probably a lot of people out there who might not take the Forward Party too seriously or not really understand what it's all about or kind of dismiss it. And maybe if they watch a little bit of that panel discussion, they'll give it another look. How does that panel discussion happen? Why do we keep making this content? Part of it is because our channel members help pay for the cost of running this thing. And, it's not an expensive thing, but it's not free either in terms of like software licensing fees and hosting fees and things like that. So I want to start by, and if you're watching this and you want to pitch in, go ahead and click the join link on YouTube. And you can start for as little as $1.99 a month. Someone who supports us in a big way is Soldier One, who is a senior vice president of Nerds for Humanity. So thank you, Soldier One, being our biggest supporter. The next level down, we have our VPs. They are Kristen Slevin and Bike. And Kristen's been with us for 33 months. Man, thank you, Kristen. OG nerd. Then we have Hardcore Nerds. And they are, come on, computer's getting slow. Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Robert, Dean, Statner, Galessa, Jay Perrin, AH, Dana, Jason, Parth, Daniel, and Mickey. And I should also thank StreamYard for helping make this streaming possible. And then at our entry level, in order of oldest, is Lisa, Albert, Brandon, Arez, Sophia, Doris, Emerald, Ben, Rasta, James, Emma, Elizabeth, Ira, Shoni, Dr. A, Jameson, William, Karen, Arden, Zemery, Mai, Brittany, Warren, Wana, Lucky, Kevin, Nell, Mercy Ann, Toby, Jeremy, David, Nicholas, Mike, Aurora, Lisa, and Carter. And channel has been deleted. And our overall, who are our youngest members? Let's see, across all of them, who are the newest nerds? The newest nerds are N. Carter, someone whose channel was deleted, Aurora Borealis, Lisa Mans, Mickey, and Mike, all less than 28 days old. And our oldest supporters are Lisa, Jean, Kristen, Albert, Brandon, Arez, and David. So thanks for making this channel possible. If you're wondering, hey, I'm looking for other candidates to support, go to ofthepeople.us. And if you know someone running for office and they're not already listed, just let the campaign team know that it's free. And you get a little, at least, exposure on the Nerd channel and then in web search results as well. Who's trending right now on Other People? You got Marcus Flowers, who's a Army veteran, patriot, Georgia Democrat running to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene. And you've got Lanhee Chen, who's a Republican running for California State Controller, and Gary Voter in South Carolina. Then you've got David Kim in California and John Fetterman running for Senate to represent Pennsylvania. And you can sort by popular, which is the most recent approval votes, or if you want to go by all time, you can see Larry Sharp running for governor, David Kim and Jermaine Johnson have the most approval votes overall. And if you're wondering, well, how do I approve a vote? You just click on the person's name, click approve, sign in, and it'll boost them in the rankings. Who makes Of the People possible? Those are our Patreon supporters, and you can help out Of the People by clicking on the Accelerate This Project link on Of the People, or go to Patreon and search for Of the People. In order of full support, we have Eric Sanchez, Elizabeth Owen, Tony Perella, Rockout, Iggy C, Aaron Sarnat, John Perino, Rob, Timothy Jordan, Jessica Ganoan, Trickle Up, Muhan Jang, Travis Klein, Austin Bagan, Mai Zimmerus, and Dylan Shell as our Of the People patrons. So thank you. It's Sunday. We've been together for over an hour, almost an hour and a half now. So I'm going to say goodbye, nerds, myself. If you can't join, definitely give me that like. Smash that like button like an angry nerd. Smash it right now. Bye, nerds.